was thinking the other day, why are inexpensive guitars usually, everybody just kind of considers them bad, right? It's assumed that it's bad. I had a friend of mine that spent $1,200 on a Les Paul and then turned around and spent another $230-ish on new pickups for it, which is cool. I mean, but for $1,200 shouldn't have already come with good pickups. But that's considered modding, right? So how come if somebody was to spend, $100 on a cheap guitar, not used, a cheap new guitar, why is that not considered modding? Maybe it is. I personally love cheap guitars. And what I started thinking about the other day, thinking of all this, is what is it that's wrong with a cheap guitar? And can it be fixed, right? Is it a tuning issue, right? Because if it's a tuning issue, then there's certain things that you're going to want to look at or mod. If it's a tone issue, there's certain things you could change to make the tone sound better. If it's a playability issue, then maybe it just needs to be set up properly. I know a lot of people, I've seen a lot of YouTube videos where people are like, oh, I got this guitar, it wasn't even in tune. Well, you're going to set it up, right? Like, you can't just tune it and play it. Like, I guess you can, but whatever. So I figured I would do a video talking about my guitar collection. I have probably the worst guitar collection on YouTube, to be honest. It's mostly cheap guitars, but I love that Grand Theft Auto, Gran Turismo mentality of taking something cheap and seeing how good you can make it. We've all done it. If you've ever played GTA, that's one of the fun things, right? You buy a really shitty car, take it to a shop, and you modify it to see how good you can make it, or see how much faster it gets. You do it on Gran Turismo as well. I like doing that with guitars, right? There's nothing better than taking a really cheap guitar and just changing a handful of things in it and making it so much better than it came, right? And it doesn't even have to be that expensive. If you have a friend that spent $1,200 on a Les Paul and then turn around and replace the pickups, those pickups are probably way better than your, Harley Benton Les Paul, or your Ivy Les Paul. Those pickups that came out of that Les Paul are probably way better. Doesn't even have to be a Les Paul. It could be an SG or something. They'd be way better. Hell, it could even be a 335. So I figured I would start a video today and just talk about what I like about cheap guitars and things that I've learned. I'm not an expert. I'm not a luthier. I'm not a guitar tech. But things that I've learned that you can change on a guitar that will make a huge difference. So if you're into that, then stick around. Okay, the first problem I'll talk about is tuning, right? That's probably the most common problem with inexpensive guitars. The one closest to me is my Epiphone. This is an Epiphone, I think it's an SG 400. I bought it back in like 98, 99. I bought it used, but this one had tuning issues. A lot of Gibsons have like a G string kind of issue. And so some of the things I changed on this one was, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but this is a rolling bridge. If you have any of the Nashville or Tunematic style bridges, they make these rolling bridges. Super easy to replace. You take the strings off and the string tension's holding this on. There's no screws or anything. You just pop it off, put a new one on. In fact, if you get the same finish and the same dimensions, obviously, you don't even have to put the studs in. You can just do it that way. Adjusting the stop bar can sometimes affect tuning, more tone than tuning, but it really shouldn't be touching the back side of your bridge. But the thing that helped the most, other than the rolling bridge helped a lot. And what I mean by rolling bridge is instead of having a pointed saddle, these things that the strings lay across, these have a wheel, like a pulley that rolls, and it just kind of helps the string settle in better, so it's not a sharp angle. It's not hitting an edge, it's rolling, so it can move freely. But the thing that helped probably the most is, sorry, making sure it's in the shot, is this right here. This is the nut. This is a Graphtec nut. This is made out of graphite, the same stuff as pencil lead. The strings slide through there a lot smoother. One thing you'll run into on cheaper guitars, and sometimes not so cheap guitars, is you ever had it where you're tuning a string and your tuner is saying it's flat, it's flat, it's flat, it's flat. You move it a little bit, nothing changes. You move it a little bit, nothing changes, and all of a sudden, boom, it's sharp. Sometimes you'll even hear a ping and it'll go sharp. That's because it's usually sticking in the nut. So there's a couple things you can do where you don't have to spend money that'll fix that, right? You want to get your D string, which is the smallest wound string on it. So this is what I do first, is you take a cut piece of D string. Next time you change your strings, just cut a little piece off and save it. And what you want to do is you want to file the inside edges of your nut, right? Your nut slot is going to be like this to hold the string. You don't want to make that deeper, because if you make it deeper, you're going to have playability issues, right? What you want to do is smooth out the outer edges of it so the string has nothing to catch on, right? And you can do that with the string. If you want to, you can use the E string, the A string, and the D string. I usually just take a D string because it's the smallest out of all three of them, and I just kind of run it back and forth in the nut slot, mostly on the sides of it. Second thing you can do is you can get a mechanical pencil, the smallest lead better. I use like a 0.5 millimeter lead, and just color in the inside of that nut slot, and it'll make it so that the graphite will lubricate the inside of where the string sits. If you're ever a Boy Scout and you did the slot cars, most of the time you or your dad lubricated the wheels and the axle with graphite dust. Well, that's all you're doing on this. You're just creating your own graphite dust with a pencil. And so those two things help a lot. A lot of people want to go with the locking nuts. I'm sorry, the locking tuners. This one has locking tuners on it. They're supposed to look like they came stock with it, but these are locking tuners. They help with string changes, or if you don't really know how to properly change strings, that can help. But usually, unless your tuning keys have a little bit of play in them, the tuning keys, in my experience, the tuning keys aren't generally the problem. The problem is usually the nut, or it's your bridge. If it's a Fender style, the bridge and the saddles, not so much, but your nut definitely. Across the board on most guitars, your nut can cause the biggest problem when it comes to tuning. The second part of tuning is something called, wow, I totally lost what intonation. The second part of that is intonation, right? Almost every guitar will have, on the bottom of this, there's screws, right? So these saddles move towards your nut and away from the nut. This one has it. Most guitars have it. If you have an older Japanese guitar, like a Gaiatone or a Kingston or a Taisco or something like that, sometimes they'll have these bridges on there that you cannot adjust the intonation on. Acoustic guitars, you can't adjust the intonation on typically. But basically what happens is your string, when you get to the 12th fret, on most guitars, the 12th fret will be marked a different way. Most of them, Gibsons have these trapezoid shapes, but on the neck, it'll have 2 dots. Most Fenders style guitars, they'll have 2 dots as well. So you want to go to the 12th fret, hit the note. That should be an octave higher than the open string. If you're on your E string and it's in tune, you should be able to hit the E string at the 12th fret, and it should be in tune as well. But most of the 99% of the time with a cheap guitar and inexpensive guitar, you're going to see that it's sharp or flat. So that's where these screws come into play, right? You want to adjust these screws either towards the nut or away from the nut. You're literally making the string longer or shorter, right? Because the termination point are these saddles, right? So you're either making the string longer or shorter in order to make sure that your 12th fret is in tune. Now, as soon as you adjust this, your guitar is going to go out of tune. That string's going to go out of tune, right? So you're going to have to tune the string open again and then hit the 12th fret and see if it's in tune. And you'll see the difference. And if you need to, go ridiculous with it, right? If you're not sure which way to go, loosen it all the way up to the top and then tune it and see like, oh, wow, that's really sharp. And then as you gradually start pulling it down, you'll notice it's a little bit less sharp, a little bit, that kind of thing. So those are the things that'll affect tuning the most. If you really want to, like I did, on a lot of my Gibson style ones, I went ahead and got the rolling bridge because they're that good. I really, really like them. Graphtec, when you get into replacing nuts, it's a little bit trickier because you have to first remove the old nut. The best way I found to do that is to get a block of wood and put it up against, take off the strings, put a block of wood up against the inside edge of this and very gently tap it, preferably with a tack hammer if you probably don't want to use a full-size hammer. Or the palm of your hand, but you put a piece of wood up underneath here and you just kind of hit it until till the glue breaks free. I put mine back on with Tight Bond wood glue. I've heard of people super gluing them, but that makes me nervous. I don't know why. Maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to correct me. But you want to order these according to what guitar you have. And then also from there, take your old nut off and try to measure it. Measure the width of it, measure the height of it. On some cheap guitars, I had a guitar that was a Strat style guitar, and I replaced the nut. I just ordered a stock Strat nut, and it was wrong because they had put a Telecaster neck on a Strat style body. So that's why it's important to take the nut off and measure it. Go ahead and look it up for what kind of guitar it's supposed to be, whether it's a Strat style, a Telecaster style, a hollow body style, a Fender style, that kind of stuff. But then also do your due diligence and take a set of calipers or whatever you have, a metal ruler, a calibrated ruler or something, and check and see what the length is, the width is, and the height of it is, and the height of the nut slot itself, because otherwise it'll create playability issues that we'll talk about later on. But with most common style guitars, GraphTech makes all of them, and worst case scenario, you might have to sand it down a little bit to make it fit, but I'm so glad I got a GraphTech on this. The tuning on it is amazing. So you can make the slightest little adjustment on Tuning King, and you can actually, you can see on your tuner it making a difference, as opposed to when you buy a cheap guitar, you got to really crank that thing, or you got to drop it down flat and then come up to it gradually because you know it's going to stick in the nut slot and everything. So those are the biggest issues I found with tuning on a cheap guitar. The second thing that people tend to have a problem with either cheaper guitars or any guitar sometimes is the tone of the guitar. Now, it goes without saying that most of your tone comes from your amp. And in my opinion, one of the biggest changes you can make to your guitar is actually an equalizer pedal. You can get them pretty cheap. You can get them, I think, less than $20 on Amazon, and that'll make a huge difference in how your guitar sounds. But we're not talking about that kind of stuff right now. We're talking about guitars. The cheapest way you can change the tone of your guitar is, well, first, I guess, by playing with your volume and your tone knobs. A lot of people just want to crank up the volume to 10 and keep the tone knob on whatever it comes with, and then suddenly they're wanting to change out pickups and stuff. Adjusting the volumes can sometimes change the tone of it. If you have cheaper pickups, they don't as much. The tone knob can adjust it too. But the first thing people tend to jump to, first thing I tend to jump to when I want to change the tone of a guitar is I'll experiment with the strings. Sometimes putting heavier gauge string on it, or sometimes just changing the brand of the string can really have a good impact on your tone overall. So if you have a guitar that's like a copy of a Strat, maybe you want to change it either to the kind of strings that tend to be used on Strats, or maybe you want to change it out to something else just to get a different sound to it. So that sometimes helps. But the first thing most people go to when they think tone is the pickups. And it's really tempting to say, oh, I'll just go ahead and change pickups out, which you can. But you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money on pickups. I've got a Mitchell back behind me that has, I got it as a body and a neck without anything in it. And I put a P90 in the bridge position, and I wanted to put a single coil in the neck position, and both of the ones that I picked up are Wilkinson pickups. They're pretty inexpensive. You'll come up on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description for that too. A lot of the Wilkinson brand pickups are generally fairly inexpensive, but they still sound pretty good too. And again, you're talking about a cheap guitar. You're not, I mean, I agree it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to buy a $53 Garrett, Telecaster and then put $250 pickups in it. If you're gonna spend $250, you might as well buy a $250. You could buy a Fender Squier for that much. So you see what I'm saying. But to spend $20 on pickups, why not? If they're better than what came with it. But what I found out, and I did a video on it, what I found out is you can actually change out just the magnet. My dog. You can change out just the magnet of your pickups, and it's not really that complicated. It does require taking out the pickup, but you can change just the magnet. There's a few things you have to remember. You have to make sure that the poles on your pickups stay the same. Otherwise, you might have that Brian May kind of sound going on, which I guess if that's what you want. So that can be done fairly easily. I changed out on one of my guitars, I think it's the black hollow body behind me, I changed them out from a ceramic to an Alnico 3, I believe. And it made a difference in how it sounded. It sounded pretty neat. The other thing you can do is try to buy some used pickups like for instance, if somebody has like an Epiphone like the one next to me, I put Gibson pickups in it. So my Epiphone pickups that were in it, I put in one of my hollow bodies. Why not? They're Epiphone, they're nice pickups. And if you go into Reverb or eBay, there's a lot of times there's people selling these. And what I learned is if you're willing to buy them separate, like, because your instinct is going to be to get, why did I say instinct that way? Instinct? Your instinct is going to be to buy them in a set. But if you know what kind of pickups you want, just look for like a Gibson 490 bridge pickup or a Gibson 490 neck pickup. Sometimes you can save money doing it that way. So that's the first thing, is buy used name brand pickups. The second is buy something like Wilkinson. That's kind of cheap, but still better than what it came with. So that's the first thing that will change your tone, or the second thing rather, because the strings are first. The other thing that can affect your tone is your wiring harness. There are capacitors in your wiring harness, and those can make a bit of a difference. The value of your pots, your volume pots, can make a difference. Typically with single coils, they use 250K pots. Humbuckers use 500K pots. Active pickups use, I can't remember, 25K or so. I can't remember what it is. But changing out the different pots can help too. So I know guys that will take if they have a single coil, they'll take a 250K pot and put a resistor on it to make it like 180. Or they'll take a 500K pot and put a resistor on it and make it 320 or something. That way it's a little bit in between a 250 and a 500. You may not hear a huge difference, but it does make a difference. And the cap does make a difference too. Stuff like the nut and the bridge and stuff can make a difference. Like if you have a Telecaster and you're looking more of that twangy, that quacky style, changing the nut out to a brass nut sometimes helps. So there's things like that can change the tone, but I still say that probably the two biggest things that'll affect your tone is what strings you run and an equalizer pedal. Those are the two biggest things that'll affect your tone. A lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's true. Okay, so the third thing that people tend to have a problem with cheaper guitars, or even any guitar, sometimes used guitars, sometimes expensive guitars, is playability. And playability can mean different things to different people, but the biggest thing that affects playability is a good setup. I set up my own guitars. I don't go and have it done. It's not really that hard. I follow the same process for every guitar. The first thing I do is I level and crown the frets. So what does that mean? The first thing you want to do is, if you don't know, these are the lines on the top of the guitar, those are the frets. The first thing you want to do is take the strings off, because they're probably not that good at strings anyways. You want to get a level sander. What I did was I went ahead and got a metal, I recommend metal, level from Harbor Freight. And you want to, I put peel and stick 200 grit sandpaper on it. And what you want to do on the guitar is you first have to make sure the neck is completely flat. And you do that with a notch straight edge. It's basically a ruler with notches cut out that go over top of the frets. That way you can make sure the wood on your neck is completely straight. You don't want to see any light underneath your notch straight edge. Once you know it's flat, then you're going to take your level sander and you're going to run it up and down the neck of the guitar until no more Sharpie is seen on any of the frets. If Sharpie is seen, then it's a low-lying spot. That's not good. That means that you'll have to press a little bit harder on that fret for your string to play the note, or it'll buzz or something like that. You don't want that. So once you've done all that, then now your frets are flat. They're no longer crowned. They're flat, right? So you have to put that crown back on it. And so what you do is you can get a fret crowning tool, or I use files. I wouldn't recommend using files if you've never done this. I would just get a fret crowning tool. Spend a little bit of money and get a decent one. Otherwise, it might be a one-time use kind of thing. Try to stay away from the $8 Temu ones. I've heard they're not that good. You want to color all your frets again, and you want to use that fret crowning tool on every single one of your frets. It's thundering outside. Every single one of your frets. Again, until the Sharpie line is as thin as possible, right? And that means that your frets, nice and crowned like that. The third thing I do on that step is I polish all the frets. What I do is I take a piece of sandpaper, wrap it around my middle finger, and I run it up and down the neck of the guitar. And that kind of hits a lot of the rough spots. You don't need to use a Sharpie on this step. And I go from 400 grit sandpaper all the way up to 5,000 grit sandpaper. Once you hit 5,000, it'll look pretty good. It'll probably look about like it did when you bought it. But I take it a step further. I get a Dremel with a soft polishing wheel on it, and I use brown polishing compound, and I polish each individual fret. After that, I use a dry polishing wheel on my Dremel, and that buffs it to a really, almost a mirror finish. And what that does is it makes it so that when you bend any strings, it doesn't feel gritty and rough. It feels really nice and smooth. So that's the first step I do. The second step I do is I make sure that the action is okay, right? And there's a couple of things. The action is how high from the guitar your strings are, specifically on the neck. So the first thing I do with that is I tune all the strings. Then you want to check, what I do is I put a capo at the first fret and I press the last fret with my finger, and I see how much space there is between the string and the 12th fret, the metal 12th fret, not the opening between the frets, the actual metal on the 12th fret. And you want just a little bit of space there. You don't want it touching the string, but you don't want it really far away from it either. If it's touching the string, you want to adjust your truss rod so that your neck comes towards the strings a little bit. And you'll see, as soon as you make the adjustment, you'll see the string move, right? And you want about, I go for about maybe a half of a string width, maybe a quarter of a string width. I have feeler gauges that I use. You can buy them at Harbor Freight, really, really cheap. Most guitars will have a tolerance for that. Like they'll have a spec for how high the action should be at the 12th fret. I would go ahead and write that information down, because you can adjust all of your guitars to have the same action. That way, no matter what guitar you play, it feels the same. To some people, that's really important. The next step I do is I go ahead and tune all my strings again, and I would go ahead and adjust the intonation. Now, the intonation of these screws we talked about earlier, at the bottom of the bridge. And what you want to do is you want to make sure when you tune a string open E, your bottom E string, for instance, you want to make sure that it's also in E tuned at the 12th fret, because that's an octave higher than the open string. The problem is the length of the string will determine whether or not the 12th fret, because the 12th fret should be the very center of that string. And sometimes you have to adjust literally the length of the string in order to make sure that that 12th fret is right in the center, right? You can't really do it by measuring. It's not really that easy. So what you do is you tune your string, press the 12th fret. Naturally, you don't want to overpress it because that'll make it go sharp. You don't want to underpress it because it'll make it buzz, about like you would normally press it. And then you want to hit it, and it should be in tune. If it's not, then you adjust these intonation screws at the bottom of your bridge, and then that should correct the issue. Now, every time you adjust these screws, you're going to have to retune the string open, because you're changing the length of the string, which is going to make the string go out of tune. And you want to do that to all your strings. That's the other thing that'll affect playability, because otherwise what will happen is if you're playing bar chords, as you go up the fretboard, you'll notice it starts sounding like garbage when you get up really high. That's because the strings are no longer in tune. So you play a bar chord at the bottom, you're like, oh man, that sounds great. Play an open E chord, like, oh man, it sounds amazing. Play that same E chord way up here on the neck, and it's like, it just sounds like garbage. So intonation will help that a lot. The third thing that will affect playability and a little bit of tone as well is the action height of your strings. Now that's how high away from the fretboard your strings are. Usually there's a tolerance for this. There's a tool that you can use for this. I'll put a link in the description. And you can look up the spec on the guitar to see what the action height should be. It's either in millimeters or it's in 32nds or 64ths or whatever. Again, you can adjust the action on all your guitars, so they're all the same. On Tune-O-Matic and Nashville style bridges, these screws on either side of it will adjust that. On Gibsons, they have screws on the saddles themselves that will push it away. That's pretty important, because if the strings are too far away from the guitar, you're gonna have to press really, really hard to fret the string, and your pickups aren't gonna be as effective. Which brings me to my other thing that you can adjust is the height of your pickups themselves. Again, a lot of times those have a tolerance. Some guitar players will purposely bottom out their pickups because they like the sound. Other ones will push it a little bit closer to the string because they want it hotter. You have to be careful with some kind of pickups, like single coils have a strong magnet on them, and sometimes, especially if you're running hot rails or something, the magnets can be so strong that it actually reduces the how long the sustain on your strings. It can actually make your strings not ring out as long. So you want to be careful with certain pickups not to get too close to the strings, but the pickups, these two screws on either side of them on humbuckers and single coils are the same way. They push it further, or further away or closer to the strings. And those usually have a tolerance. And again, the tool that you use, I'll put the link in the description, the tool that you use to see what the action is on your strings will also tell you the action of your pickup, which is great. The other thing that'll affect playability a little bit is your stop bar. Some people on these Nashville style bridges, they'll back wrap the strings because they say it helps with tuning and that kind of stuff. I've tried it, I don't really hear a difference, to be honest with you. But having your stop bar too low will make the back edge of these strings hit your bridge, and that will reduce the amount of sustain as well. So you don't want your strings touching the backside of this bridge. You're not supposed to. I think that's why some people like back wrapping them, because it comes around over top of the stop bar and it prevents it from hitting that bridge. I don't know. But I believe that's it for playability. I hope any of these things helped. I hope it makes it so you're not afraid to buy a cheap guitar. I highly suggest learning how to set up your guitar yourself. You don't have to maybe level and crown the frets, but at least do all the other stuff. Because if you live in a climate where you have a lot of season changes, I live in Central Florida, so we pretty much have summer and spring. But if you live up north where you actually have seasons, in wintertime it might get dry because you're running your heat and all that kind of stuff. Wood will change. And then you get into the summertime or springtime, you might open your windows, or summertime you might change it. Either way, the wood, especially in the neck, will swell and contract and change and all this kind of stuff. And generally you kind of want to set up your guitar probably twice a year. I would do it at the end of wintertime and at the end of summertime, or at least once a year. I do mine once a year. I don't really see a whole lot of changes, but sometimes I do, especially if it's a new guitar and the wood hasn't dried out or whatever. So I hope all this stuff helped. Maybe in the future I'll pull out some of my guitars and show you more individual things that I've done and kind of show you exactly what I changed out. And if you want to see any of that kind of stuff, yeah, just say the word. But I hope any of this helped. I might also do videos on some of the tools that I use, like the soldering iron that I use, or some of the amplifier work that I do, Variacs and isolation transformers and all that kind of stuff. But I hope this helped, and yeah, have a good one.